There are many questions surrounding what voting will look like this fall amid the coronavirus pandemic. A record number of Americans are expected to vote by mail in November. Many states have moved to expand mail-in voting to address voters' concerns about voting safely in a pandemic. Yet the president and his allies continue to argue without evidence that could lead to what he calls a rigged election. Joining me is Norden. He is the director of the Election Reform Program at the Brennan Center for Justice and CBSN legal contributor Keir Dougall. Welcome to you both. Lawrence, does voting by mail actually increase the risk of voter fraud? And how are election officials addressing any potential security gaps?
First thing that's important for folks to know is that we've had mail voting in the United States since the Civil War. It's very well tested. The troops were allowed to vote by mail during the Civil War. We've done it in every federal election since then. And in the last couple of federal elections, about 25% of Americans in each federal election has decided to choose the option to vote by mail. And it is extremely secure. Fraud is exceptionally rare. It's more common for somebody to get struck by lightning than to commit voter fraud by mail. And when it does, on the rare occasions when it does happen, it's caught. There's a very good security process that's in place with vote by mail because we've been doing it for so long.
And Keir, there's not one standard here. A number of legal fights have erupted over mail-in ballots and absentee voting and how rules vary by state. Could the different state rules lead to confusion among voters and election poll workers?
It's possible, but there's a lot of information out there that voters can get. If they're concerned about particular state rules, you should check. Some states allow no excuse mail-in balloting. Some states require an excuse. There has been, and there currently is, some litigation over whether or not, for instance, if you need an excuse in a state, whether that excuse can be expanded to cover our coronavirus pandemic that's currently going on. But I agree with Lawrence that the long history of mail-in voting in our country should provide a lot of confidence and security, at least in the minds of voters.
At the same time, Lawrence, a new Wall Street Journal report finds election officials are still vulnerable to email attacks, including 6 jurisdictions which are using a software linked to Russian cyber attacks in 2016. Why have these systems not been updated, and has the pandemic left us more vulnerable to foreign interference?
Yeah, look, one thing that's very difficult about elections in the United States is that they really are decentralized. So you have literally close to 10,000 separate election jurisdictions in the United States, and there are going to be gaps. And it's unfortunate that some election officials around the country are using email services that are probably not as secure as they should be. And there's no question that because there's been so much focus on addressing COVID, that there's probably been less focus in the last few months on election security than there should be. But I think something that's important for folks to know is that the things that have been identified in the Wall Street Journal, the kinds of cyber attacks that are legitimate concerns to be worried about in terms of what might happen against election. There are procedures that can be put in place still. There's plenty of time to ensure that even if there is a cyber attack against our election systems, that they will be resilient, that people will still be able to vote, and that we'll be able to count those votes.
Still, Lawrence, could that undermine confidence in the results on election night?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's why it's so important for election officials to be communicating to the public what security measures they have in place, that if systems go down, that people will still be able to vote, that there'll be paper ballots that will be available for them to fill them out, that there are backup plans in place, and to be as transparent as possible in the process. And there's no question that since 2016, the United States has improved in terms of election security. We have far fewer of the kind of paperless systems that election security experts have warned about. The Department of Homeland Security has been giving a lot of extra assistance to election jurisdictions, and there's been just a ton more training and best practices around election security in the United States than we saw just a few years ago.
And Keir, President Trump refuses to say if he would accept the election results. What would happen if he loses but does not concede?
Well, he's not required to concede. The Constitution has a 4-year term specified in the clear text of the Constitution. If at the end of his term on January 20th, if for some reason all of our fears are confirmed and there are still disputes over the election, the 20th Amendment of the Constitution would take us into the order of succession, assuming the vice president and the presidency have not been determined. You'd follow that order of succession to the Speaker of the House or the President pro tempore of the Senate. So there are procedures in place that would allow for the transition of power, even if there was a contested or an indeterminate election.
All right, Lawrence Norden and Keir Dougall, really grateful for your insight on this. Thank you both very much.
Thanks so much.